and welcome to my channel. My name is Francisca, and in today's video I'll be showing you how to make this beautiful double-breasted blazer jacket. I decided to make it sleeveless because of course that was what I wanted, but I hope you guys are interested in this tutorial so you see how to put up your fabric pieces together to make up this amazing beautiful piece that you can see here. I hope you like what you are seeing, and it's definitely something that I enjoyed making. So if you're new to my channel, welcome. Kindly click the subscribe button, and of course please click the bell so you get updates when new sewing tutorial pops up. And now let's get right into the sewing tutorial for this double-breasted blazer. So here is the pattern that we created in the last video. We have the back pattern right here. So this is the part that's going towards the side seam. Here is the part that is going towards the center back, okay? And we have our dart cut out because we are sewing a shoulder princess seam double-breasted blazer jacket. So right here is the front pattern. We have the part that is going towards the side seam, and we have the part that is going towards the center front, which is the part that has the lapel that you can see here. And of course we have the collar pattern. So here is my pattern all cut out for the main fabric. So we have the back right here, which is 4 pieces, and then if we come right here, we have the front, which is equally 4 pieces. So I've gone ahead to add interfacing to all the fabric pieces of my main fabric, and for my lining I cut it out as well, and I interfaced that with paper stay. So here is the lining that I'm using for this tutorial. I'm using suit lining, and like I said earlier, I have added stay to this. I use paper stay for my lining. So here is the back lining, and right here is the front lining. So the reason why I'm using the main fabric as lining for this part is because we are going to flip our collar from the inside to the outside. So you want to use your fabric for this part, okay? And now we are going to go ahead and sew our pieces up together for both the main fabric and the lining fabric. So I gave all my fabrics a 1/2 inch seam allowance all around. So this is 1/2 of the front for the main fabric. I'll take it to my sewing machine and sew up from the bottom by 1/2 inch. Do the same thing for the back pieces as well as the lining. Okay, so by the time we are done, we're going to have 2 pieces for the front and 2 pieces for the back for both main fabric and lining fabric. So guys, after sewing, this is what I have. I've sewn the pieces together. I went ahead to join the center back pieces, okay, so that I have just 1 whole piece for the back, and then the front will end up with 2 pieces. So what I'm going to do next is to go on to press the seams open. Make sure to notch the curved areas before going on to press your seam open, okay? So for both the main fabric as well as my lining fabric, I went ahead to sew the collar pieces together as well by 1/2 inch. So I'm going to explain to you guys the parts that I sewed. Now here is the collar piece that was cut out from the front pattern, okay? So can you see how it is joined? This part sits on the front neckline and connects to this part. So this is the only place that is going to be open. So after the part that sits on the front neckline, we have this sharp bend here and this part that is going to be open. So the part that I sewed on my fabric, let me show it to you like this. The part that is sewn on my fabric is this part. Can you see? Okay, so I sewed this part here and this slant here. Okay, so I stopped right where the slant is. And what we want to do is to notch where the stitch ended. Okay, so notch that point. Do the same thing for the other side as well. All right, because we are going to go ahead and notch this place, turn our fabric inside out, and then bring out this part that you notch. You need to bring it out so that it will be easy for you to stitch this to your front piece. Okay, so bring it out and then press it down. Do you understand? This will make it easy for you to stitch your collar to your front pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and press all my fabric pieces. So after pressing, this is what my back pattern looks like. This is what we have at the end of the day. So what I'm going to do next is to place my front pattern on it, making sure that the seams at the shoulder match, okay? That is very, very important. And I'll go on to sew my shoulder seams by a 1/2 inch seam allowance on both sides. Go on to sew my side seam by a 1/2 inch seam allowance on both sides. So I'm going to repeat this same thing that I've just explained for my lining fabric as well. I've gone ahead to press my collar, but I made sure that I top stitch right at the parts that I sewed, just this part here, okay? I didn't top stitch this side because it's only easy to top stitch. So I just did my top stitch around here so that I could press the collar nice and flat. And I brought out this part of my collar that we are going to stitch to the front part of our blazer jacket. So this is what we have. When I'm done sewing my jacket pieces together, I'll come show you guys what we're going to do next. So after sewing the shoulder slope and the side seam, I decided to test this to see the fit, and I realized that my armhole was a bit too wide. Okay, so what I did was to take off a half an inch only at this end. So I started sewing by half an inch and sloped it downwards to end with 1 inch here. So after pressing my seams, this is what I have for my jacket, my main fabric, and this is what I have for my lining fabric. What we want to do next is to now couple this together. So I'm going to wear my lining fabric into the main fabric with wrong side stitching, because we want to sew the armhole, and there's a way I sew my armhole such that it comes out nice and neat. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to place it like this. Now, if you want to go on to attach a pocket to your main fabric, I would advise that, or even to your lining fabric, I would advise that you do it before coupling the two pieces together. Now that we have this, I'm going to place it like this. Match the shoulder seams. I'll place it like this, and I'm going to pin this part of the shoulder seam down. Then I'm going to match under the armhole to this part right here for the two fabrics. I'm going to match them together and pin. And when you finish pinning, you need to check to be sure that everything is in order. Okay, so this is how we are going to sew it, like this, from under the armhole to the shoulder seam, from under the armhole, okay, to the shoulder seam, such that by the time you finish sewing and you turn it, you are going to have a neatly sewn armhole. So I'll take this to my sewing machine and sew it up like I explained earlier. Sew it up by my seam allowance, and I'll come show you guys how we are going to work on the next armhole. So after sewing, this is what I have. I've sewn the armhole together. I went ahead to top stitch on my lining, okay, so that the armhole area will sit well. All right, before you top stitch, make sure to notch your armhole, because that is a round place. So make sure you notch to make your top stitching easier. So that is what I did, and I've not pressed this part, but you would notice that it is, sitting really well. So what I want to do right now is to repeat what I have done here for the other armhole. Okay, so I will just wear it back. So after wearing it like this, now I'm going to match the shoulder seams. Okay, turn it back inside out, or right sides, wrong sides out. So I turn it wrong sides out like this, and then I'll pin the shoulder seam. Then I'll go on to pin the underarm area. So I'll go on to pin it like this. And when you finish pinning, please check that you have a continuous, circle going on here. So here is the underarm moving towards the shoulder seam, okay? And right here is the shoulder seam. I need to make sure that I have a full circle. Right here is the shoulder seam moving towards my underarm. Now that I've confirmed that I have, a full circle going on here, I'll just go ahead and stitch this up with my seam allowance and also do my top stitch. So I've gone ahead to sew up the second armhole and have top stitched. What I want to do next now is to add a false pocket. So I decided to add a false pocket in order to, give my jacket something extra. Okay, so it's not just looking plain. What I'm going to do right now is determine where I want to place my pockets. So if I decide I want to place it around my waist or a little lower, that is definitely fine. I'll be using this shoulder seam line, this princess seam line, to determine where I want to place my pocket. So I'm going to measure from that point. Okay, so I'll be placing it where my 16-inch mark is. So I'm just going to come right there and mark that 16-inch. And I'll do the same thing for this other side as well. measure and mark 16 inch. So I want to make sure that these 2 points are matching. If they're not matching, your pocket is going to look lopsided. So I guess from what you can see, it matches well. At this point now, I'm going to draw a straight line. So this is how we're going to place our pockets. It's going to be 1 inch before the dart towards the side seam. Okay, so it's going to be sort of like this. The reason why I'm doing it is so that by the time we button up our jacket, we're not covering up much of the pockets. Okay, so that's why I'm going to place it 1 inch towards the center front. Sorry, I'm going to place it 1 inch towards the center front. The remaining one will be towards the side seam. Okay, so this is the pocket piece that I cut out. I cut out 2 pieces, and it is measuring 6 inches by 5.5 inch. So this part that is measuring 5.5 inch is the part that we are going to fold like this. So what I'm going to do is fold it into 2. I'll take it to my sewing machine, sew here by 1/4 inch, here by 1/4 inch. Then I'll turn it right sides out and use a zigzag stitch to close off this edge. So after running my zigzag stitch at the edge here, I went out to press it by 1/2 inch at that place. I did the same thing for the other one as well. And then I'm going to place it like this. Like I said, 1 inch away from my seam here. So just like this. And I'll go on to stitch it down. Do the same thing for the other side as well. Go on to stitch it down by 1/4 inch. So guys, now that we are done stitching the false pockets to the blazer, what we're going to do next is to sew on the collar to the neckline of the jacket. This is how I'm going to attach my collar to the neckline. First of all, I will attach it to the lining neckline first. So I'm going to place the center back of the collar and pin it down to the center back of my neckline. Then I'll come right here and pin the notched part of the collar around the shoulder, pin it to the shoulder seam. Then I'll come right at this side. What I'm going to do is to pin this part where we want the notch of the collar to be. I'm going to pin it to this end here. And what I'm going to do is take this to my sewing machine. I'm going to be sewing from the center back and stop right here. Okay, I'm going to stop right here, this part here. So I'll be sewing with 1/2 inch seam allowance all around, and then I'll repeat the same thing for the other side as well before we will go on to attach the main fabric piece. Okay, so I want it done as neatly as possible. That is why I'm doing it this way. So after sewing the collar to the lining material, the next thing we want to do is to now attach this to the main fabric, okay, such that the collar, the allowance for the collar is sandwiched in between the lining and the main fabric. So what I'm going to do is to bring this out from under because we haven't stitched it. So I'm just going to bring it out like this. Can you see? So I'll bring it out like this. So I'm going to arrange it like this. Okay, so can you see what I'm doing? I'll arrange it like this and pin down or peg it down, whichever works for you. I'll as well go on to peg the center back down. So can you see what I'm doing? And then repeat what I've done here for this side. Okay, so I'll just go on to peg it down. All right, so now that we have done this, I'll go on to stitch the collar following the seam that is on this back. Okay, so I'm going to use this part that I've stitched as a guide to stitch the collar onto the bodies, onto the jacket bodies, making sure that the shoulder seams align as well. Okay, so after stitching the main fabric to the collar, I'm going to go on to trim off the excess fabric here so that this collar can lay nicely on the neck. All right, so just go ahead and trim yours. So after trimming, this is what I have. Then I'll go on to bring the right sides out so that we can see what our collar looks like after we are done stitching it up. Okay, so this is what my collar looks like on both ends. This is what we have. Then I'll go on to press this down so that it can lay nice and flat. You will notice that when sewing my collar for the main fabric, I started stitching right from the lapel points, okay? Then I stitch all the way around the collar to the other lapel points, okay? So I'll go on to press this down. So here is my collar all pressed. What we want to do next is to finish up our jacket by closing off our lapel and close off the bottom of this dress. So what I'm going to do is to go on to turn it like this. Okay, so I'll turn it like this and then stitch all the way down. Remember that your lapel part, the edge is curved, so just follow the curved line. And when I get to this breaking point, which is right here, I will just do a straight stitch downwards like this, okay? Then I'll repeat the same thing for the other side as well, and then I'll come show you guys how we are going to seal the bottom and turn our fabric. So after stitching, this is what I have. I'm going to go on to cut off this part so that the notch can come out really well. And the next one I'm going to do is to create notches around the lapel because it is sort of slightly curved. So we want to press it such that it can come out really well. And then I'm going to notch the breaking point very well so that that point can be very visible. Let's see. Now that I have notched it, what we want to do is to seal off our jacket. Now, before you go ahead and seal the bottom, you need to pick a point where you are going to use to turn your fabric right sides out. So what I did was to come to the center back. I loosened the stitch at my center back to about 6.5 inches. And this is where we are going to use to turn our jacket right sides out. So what I'm going to do next is to go on to stitch the bottom, and I'm going to make sure that the seam matches each other. Okay, so I'm going to match the seam and pin down. Okay, come to this part, match the seam and pin down all around, and I'll be sewing the bottom with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. After sewing the bottom, I'm going to cut off the excess at this point so that we can have this part pointed. Okay, and then I'll notch it. I'm going to notch this curved part as well so that it sits well when we turn it and press it. So what I'm going to do next is to bring everything out through this 6.5 inch spacing that I gave at the center back. And by the way, you can decide to use an invisible seam to close this right after turning, or you can leave it like that. Nobody's going to see the inside of your blazer when you wear it, so you can go ahead and leave it like that. If I should leave it like that, this is what it's going to look like. Okay, so it's just an opening. So this is what I have. I'll go on to press it, and then we're going to be fixing our buttons. So after pressing our jacket, this is what we have. This is what my collar looks like. Okay, the next thing we want to do is to fix the buttons. And for my buttons, I had this cover buttons made. So this is what I have, and we're going to be making use of 4 buttons, 2 buttons that would actually be functional and 2 non-functional buttons. So total of 4 buttons. So guys, this is how I'm going to place my buttons. About 1 inch from the fold of the lapel, from the break point of the lapel. So I'm going to mark it for both sides, and then we're going to be placing it 4.5 inches from the edge of the fabric here. All right, so this is where the first button will be. I cannot decide where my second button will be, and I'm going to go with 4 inches downwards, and from here I'm going to mark 4.5 inches. Okay, so this is where I'm going to be attaching my buttons to. So this is what I have, and we're going to be sewing 1 button here and another button right here. Now what I want to do next is to go ahead and mark the same thing that I've done here on the other side, but for this one now, the distance between the edge of the fabric and the point where I want the other button to be will be 5 inches. So this is where I want the other 2 buttons to be. Okay, so by the time I go on to overlap it like this, okay, so this is where my button will be. And where we are going to place these 2 buttons here, it's important that we note where it is, because we are going to be making buttonholes around those two places. So I'll go on to sew my buttons here and here, as well as right here and right here with a hand needle before going on to make my buttonholes. So basically, this is the end of the tutorial, just to attach our buttons and create buttonholes on the jacket. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, kindly give us a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, turn on the bell so you get updates when I post new videos, and I'm going to be seeing you guys in my next tutorial. Bye!